Hi guys. I'm trying to go over this guy. I mean, this is an obvious one. The last time I got hurt, this is going to be our Carrie episode. I'm just going to lean into this because we had some of it as a current life thing. This is my trail bike. What was that? So that was 13 days ago, right? Yeah, so 13 days ago, we were up here. The last episodes you watched, we were filming. And then I had a ride set up the next day. We usually we have really good single track. So we did a 20-mile first loop, and then we come back, and then we do another loop going north, a 22-mile loop, and we go to like the deli and get sandwiches and stuff. And on the way back, I crashed. And then I've been going through this thing. So, I was just looking at the bike, like it's now it's time to rebuild, but the pipe is completely smashed in, subframe is bent, bars are done, hand guards are done. Plastics probably need to be replaced. I don't know if anything's bent. Anyways, fourth gear, single track. The rain and stuff, the grass has been growing really crazy, so it gets tall and then it narrows the single track in, and literally 2 miles out from here there's like a G out that kind of throws you in the air. It's probably the only time my tires ever leave the ground. Something happened, clapped a big rock, splat. I think all of this got me in here. Cartwheel. The crazy part is I don't remember it happening, and then I got on my bike and I rode back, and I signaled for Luke to like lead because I didn't know how to get back. I didn't know where we were at, and then I got to the gate and I didn't know the gate code. We'll talk about the rest inside. Sunday, that happened Sunday. I get back here and then I'm mad at my wife asking where her car is because it's at the dealership. I didn't know where that was. And then we got to the point where it was 6 months of memory out, where I couldn't remember the last 6 months, which I still don't have a lot of emotional feeling of the last 6 months. But I couldn't remember the day before, and I had like Ryan here, Jeff was here, Barbara was here. I couldn't remember any of that. And then 3 broken ribs, broken collarbone, concussion, cracked helmet. I stayed in there till Wednesday, so 4 days. And then I got home from the hospital and I started doing what I can. And so that's why we're catching up. So yeah, this was the ambulance. Just classic shit. So I'm able to draw. And I'm able to weld pretty well, and I'm getting mobility, getting better sleep. But today we're talking about Carrie. This was a pretty big plan originally. What I mean by that is the initial project here. Ooh, dude, I felt dust, and like my brain goes immediate blowjob, wipe everything. Initial plan was to do the front. When I went, Jeff flew me out to his shop in Georgia originally. I got short breaths. That sucks. Flew me out there originally. We looked at this thing. There was just like this kind of haphazard front beam, lower engine cross member that was, I don't know if it was accurate or not, and there was no steering or anything. So it was to do the dash, finish out the inside, do some kind of treatment because he had a bedside on here that's, it's a stretched wheelbase, but it's a stock length body. So, he had the bedside floating out past the rear of the cab, maybe 8 inches. He wanted to figure out a solution for that. So, when we dug back into there, sometimes I have to go into a mode of investment versus foundation, right? If it's like the easiest way I look at it is if you're going to build a really nice house and you build it on a shitty foundation, it's like there's a deficit there that the investment doesn't make sense. And it's the same thing with the running gear on these trucks. If the suspension is not set up how it should be, why are we putting money into it or building stuff on top of it if it's not going to run as optimal as it can? So we reconfigured the back. We got all the up travel that we needed with it. We have the bypass shaft right where it needs to be for the up travel and for valving. There's kind of a ratio there. Bumped up the fuel cell like we talked about. Now it's 75 gallons. And then obviously the inside is pretty insane. So, the next thing was Jeff's thing, like, dude, we're not doing any of this until we finish that. So we got through that. This is where we're at. I know we talked about this already, but what I'm getting at is, this redo on the front, this is all kind of an intentional move. And now this is the phase 1. I'm going to put these down because I'm talking with them and I can just hear them flapping. This is cross member that we talked about, welded in. This is the rack. This is a Howe Performance 2.5 inch trophy truck billet rack in here. It's floating in a weird spot. So like the pickup, the U-joint pickup for it's located vertically, and all the swing steer is typical to the beams, and swings the way it should, except for the drag link that would usually be pulled by a pitman arm, and then assisted with a ram is not there. That's all gone, and there's just a rack that is a direct 1-to-1 making this thing pull. So, there was order of operations. We're cleaning the frame rail, cutting all the junk off, cutting the provisions for the steering gear, like the triple bolt thing here. That's all gone. Getting this fit into here per spec. That located the beam pivots, then figuring out steering. What we also opted for is this was built for stock up travel. Number one thing is that pumpkin right there. Anytime you're running a TTB or a twin traction beam or a 4-wheel drive beam, whatever you want to call it, this is the culprit for up travel limits, at least the first portion of it. So we took the next step. We put all of the cross member in here and then we started bumping it. And I'm like, dude, we're still limited. The other thing is, and that's the classic, you'll see a lot of like 4-wheel drive TTB trucks, they might be built to the tilt. Is the tilt the right word? It just doesn't make sense to me. I'm gonna have to look that up on chat. And it's like, why are we saying built to the tilt anyways? You'll see where their up travel is minimal. Like the bypass shaft, you'll only see like 4 or 5 inches set up. They're ready to bump out. Like they're essentially what you're gonna do in a truck like that is you're gonna go and the first big bump of whoop, you're gonna boom, bottom that shit out. And the truck's gonna elevate itself into a position where everything starts to work properly instead of absorbing, and not upsetting the truck. So we got this to where it bumps within 1 inch of the rear. There's 5 inches more up travel on this than there is from stock. This is all loaded, so the axles are in here. The driveline to connect both of these it's cycled with everything inside of it. So we don't have any issues regarding bind. We built this thing into a state where it's not going to be binded. Same with the articulation. I can let that other side out for you to kind of see the travel. We're at 20, I want to say 21, but let's just say 20 to be safe. Reconfigured a lot. Like we kept, if it's like a trailing arm, right? So if your pivot is inboard here and this thing is cycling like this, the closer the shock is to the pivot point, the more travel you're going to get using less stroke. The further out, the longer of a shock you're going to need to get more travel. So that's why you see like on a trailing arm, especially trophy truck style, the shocks are way inboard on the trailing arm. They're not close to the axle. So even by taking this and instead of the coilover being on this pre-existing mount, we saved that, put the bypass here, and then mounted the coilover off the radius arm. The other thing is the symmetry, right? So everything's hitting at this angle, the approach angle. So when this thing's compressed, everything is past 90 degrees. Nothing's inverted, nothing's straight up and down. and it makes everything absorb in a cleaner motion. I mean, it also brings good value to packaging. But, you know, we spent a lot of time, you know, figuring out tube layout. Everything has to be placed in space before we ran the tubes, because everything, you know, has to fill in the right way. And what I mean by that is, like, so the shocks, we have to figure out. The other thing is, you're dealing with 2 different length beams. So driver beam is longer and it's swinging a little differently than the shorter one on the passenger side. So all that has to be accounted for. Set this thing up at compression, put the coilover and the bypass in here. You know, they also swing weird. Like, beams are the trickiest thing to set up because they don't cycle clean. It's always the classic, like, people like to say dirty hook or travel, and I totally agree. They do not cycle clean travel, especially because the camber changed throughout the travel. But the other thing for, like, builders is setting them up where you get everything to work harmoniously. You get the steering to work, you know, because it's not just bottoming the car. It's bottoming it, it's going lock to lock with the steering, making sure everything clears. There's also a camber change that's coming in, so if your shocks are at a weird angle, sometimes the tire can go in and it'll contact the shocks. The other thing is, if your shocks are too far in and then you droop it, the body of the shock will swing inwards and want to contact the frame. I know you guys that have done this know the whole thing with beams, but there's an extensive process here, especially with unequal length beams, to get this thing right. And what we wanted to do is just try to shove everything back towards the firewall, preserve all the space here, make sure everything clears, make sure that the tire doesn't come and contact the coilover when it's turning one way. Same thing when it's turning the front way, you know, and then also it's getting symmetry with the bolts. Like, look, Joe, if you look here, I don't know if I have a straight edge. Like, the bolts go through at this angle. So it's making sure everything is parallel, you know, nothing's not off in any rotational way. So the same plane for the bolts, upper and lower, you know, these all have the same plane. So if you had like a piece of all thread sticking out here, there would be parallels where everything is, like, you know, symmetry and clean the way it should be. So we spent time on that. So we can see this a little closer. I know they look kind of simple, but what this is this is a plate structure that, I'm gonna move this reservoir. Big old thing. Look at that thing. So sleeved into here, made sure this was all welded. This is the pre-existing cage. Sleeved into here, cut a high notch so it's not a shear point. Meaning if we had just a tube that was straight and sleeved, that adds a shear point. And when you put an angle cut into the miter like this, it leaves a larger footprint where it's not as prone to shearing off or breaking. There's a partition in here. So there's a wall where it's welded to this tube, and then this is on and then it's welded together. So there's an actual separation here, which adds like an internal rib. And then what we'll want to do is we're going to want to add like a gusset here. I'm sorry I can't catch my breath. I'm like limited on my breathing. When I sneezed yesterday, it was the most insane thing I've probably felt ever with my chest. The brackets I'm getting at here is you can see there's a couple sections, but like say the face of this coilover front tab goes here, and then it comes across and it goes to the bypass shock. So that's all one plate that acts as a gusset. So like there's integration here where nothing can separate, and then it adds a complete structure of a shock mount. You know, same thing for this rear guy. This guy draws all the way through to this tube. You know, this guy goes in, draws all the way to this tube. This captures over to here. These wrap tangent and wrap down. So I know they look simple, but there's a lot of thought in there. And on top of that, you know, like this cut itself is so you can fit a socket through here and you can access this. You know, everything has to be thought about. Same with this. We want to make sure that we can get tooling where we're not colliding and we don't hit the tube. So we have to cycle everything, make sure that works while still finding the good symmetry hits, while making sure that the shock body is also clear. That's a big thing. You know, I've learned the hard way with the other things to note here. This was all stuff, you know, with the packaging pre-built. Like, I'm trying to figure out this camera. Things we wanted to make sure we cleared. We wanted to clear this. We also didn't want to make a big typical X and have something where the engine was hard to get out or there wasn't enough structure. So all of this has Triton Engineering tube connectors. I've found these to be far superior than your typical ones that are like squared off edges. These are round, so they're a lot easier to go in here. But this also, you know, you can see there's different planes here. What that does for banking and removable pieces, it makes you have to do a couple test runs to figure out what clocking and rotation the tube connectors need to be in and how this thing needs to come out. And I got it on the third try. I had to get those tacked in there and adjust it 3 times, but it kind of, this whole thing pivots and comes out. You know, so you loosen all the bolts here and then you tap, 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 rotational comes out. You can see limit strap tabs are offset. So that's so they don't clash with each other, you know, when it's compression. So this has a little bit of a loop here and then that'll droop out. New bump stop strike pads. And the other thing we needed to do was we needed to modify the knuckles. So the, you know, previous, this top tab that you see, that was there. And it used to have a shear up here with a capture for the rod in here, and now it's down here. So we just, you know, added the lower one and then obviously replated everything. See the shock mounts in here too. So coilover mount. You can see we did need to do something about that. That's the previous A-pillar tube. I don't know if that's really optimal for safety. So we'll go through that. But you can see, you know, we saved some bypass shaft at compression. We still, you know, this nylon pad is still something that's consumable. So, you know, this will wear and we don't want it to be wearing and then bottoming out our bypass. So there's enough there, but, you know, double sheared limit strap. So there'll be 2 straps in here with a spacer. This is a big threaded bung that's welded on here, so the bolt will just go directly in there and it doesn't have to have a nut on the other side. Double sheared on the frame side. Re-welded all the overlays that were already here. What we also had to do for up travel is a lot of clearancing. Oh my, okay. Sick motor mount, you know, but all this extra area here, like these cutouts, right? This broke area, the notch here, this pumpkin, when it goes up into this area, it is like a suit, you know, it is perfectly fit. There's probably 3/4 of an inch everywhere for it. Same on all the frame. So this is all the clearancing we had to do to get the extra up travel. And then it brings us to our steering. Oh, that too. So this is obviously for the rack to slide. So added all this guy and that clears. And this rack will probably go, you know, almost out to the edge here. Pre-existing plate work went over the welds on this. We don't do a lot of circles, so you can kind of always tell when it's someone else's stuff. Clean no matter what. I think Jacob did that, good job. And then they used stainless rod on the plate work back here. So when I went through it, I did ER80 S2 rod on there, SD2, but it, you know, the stainless pulled through the chromium and the nickel kind of told me what was in there. So 4-inch stroke bump stop. Might turn that into a 2. Ooh, okay. That's some rich looking oil, huh? I'm sorry that I'm all over the place. I'm doing the best I can, but I have consistent pain right now, and my memory is still a little foggy. It's gone from memory loss from the last 6 months, and now it's on short-term stuff. So like I talk about one thing and then I forget it kind of quickly. Joey said it's gonna go away. So I'm counting on that. Joey's wife is a nurse. Hi, Lindsay. what's going on here. I'm gonna get the drawings. Dun, dun, dun. Look at those beams. Okay. So originally, that bear claw design that you see here is what I sent Jason her. He gave me this thing with all these holes and these tabs in it. And then he 3D printed us the part, you know, these are gonna be machined out of 4140 chromoly. And so we just wanted to 3D print stuff, make sure it all fits before we get into a jam up of having something that either doesn't look right or doesn't fit. You get the point, right? So the rack adapter is not on here right now. I gotta figure out how to. Oh my, okay, there we go. Hold on here. So that's what we have. You can see this is the drag link, so this guy's gonna go almost level, and then that's everything that needs to be occupied. So with that, what I noticed on this thing, oh God, is the excess where there could be extra meat here to secure more of a surface, a footprint to make it stronger. Extra pockets, extra holes. This thing looks to me like it's unfinished, or it looks like there's other parts that are supposed to go into it. And so what we wanted to do is just revise that. The secondary swinger here, pretty cool, good shape. We're just gonna add a little bit of detail because now what I've drawn, Jeff is like, I'm telling Jeff I need to just trim these up so they look fitting for the car. And then he's like, well, put more of your style in, put more pocketing in, etc. And he gave me some freedom, some artistic liberties there. So this is what I have now. This is the inside of the pocket, like you're seeing. So that's what we're gonna get now. Still retaining the same pivot, still retaining the opening, so when it swings, the tie rods can clear. When it kicks one way, all the points are the same. And then on the exterior, bleeding some good pocketing veins into here. So that's what we have versus what was here. We're also gonna do something about the tie rods. So we have mock-up stuff in here right now. One thing you'll notice there is that cut. And I'm gonna get up, I gotta negotiate getting out of here. I wanna make sure I cover everything before. Also, thank you, Jeff Howe, for everything. Jeff Howe has answered my phone calls since I built Beth in 2012. Didn't know, I was just a kid, didn't know who I was, didn't need any credentials with him, spent time, he gave me his time, traded time on the phone to answer questions on the Hydro Boost setup and everything, and the steering, and he's been the same exact person and the same level of consistency throughout my entire career in life, and I appreciate that, Jeff, and I'm super happy to be using your product. So that's his big rack under there. That's gonna simplify a lot of stuff. Why did we run a rack instead of a steering gear? Two things. So one, wanted to simplify parts, plumbing, etc. Don't hear that often. Wanted to simplify that, just have one gnarly unit under here where we don't have to have a ram assist, we don't have extra plumbing. It just goes to a servo, and that's it. Plus, I probably will get opposition on this, but I like how racks feel and drive. And I think there's just an opportunity to do something different with a beam setup where we can experience, just get a different driving dynamic. This is gonna be very one-to-one feeling. And I have a high expectation just for what this will do for swing steer on a beam truck. And I've never seen it. Going to the tie rods. There's a small bend here. I'm trying to get it where you can kind of, I'm clocking it in a way it's not going to live. But the bend you can see that's drooping down. The way it's going to live is up like this, where it's going to be a lateral bend. So from some bird's eye view down, you'll see the bend, and that's really to clear that bolt when this thing turns, and to clear some of the pivot when this thing goes to full lock when it's at bump. So we almost got straight tie rods. If we weren't cycling this thing lock to lock at bump, meaning steering wheel lock all the way one way, all the way the other way, and at full compression, then we'd run straight tie rods. How much bend is in there? I don't know, 3 degrees, something super minimal. But what we're gonna do is to kind of keep some of the design flow and modernize some of this, is we're going to do a billet chunk. So this tie rod will be one big billet piece that will go over from rod end to rod end, and it's gonna be sculpted with a knife edge and have a little knuckle where the bend is, and a knuckle. Like there's gonna be all this, I have it, you know what I'll do? I'll print out the drawing that I have. Hey Joey, don't let me forget before I'm done filming with this episode that we print out the drawing. Print out the drawing? For the tie rod. Okay. Cool. We're gonna run a big gnarly tie rod that's machined. And then these other, like the rest of the family of tie rods, we'll put some details in them so they can still be round, or maybe that guy will be machined too, just so the design's cohesive. But then you'll look under here. Let me get this. I think I can let the suspension out for you too. Moment of silence. There we go. So when you look under here, they'll be all clean, like, rack in here, billet swingers, billet tie rods that have like the similar styling as the rack will have. Like I said, think about like I hate to say that probably the most robust analogy or relation is a hockey stick, but something that's got a knife edge on it or something, and then it has some taper and some shape drawn into it where it matters. Something else we want to look at here is, like I mentioned, building this thing in phases. So we have 2 big primary phases that I see left. I don't think there's a ton here, but really there's going to be accessory packaging, front assembly with accessories. So all the coolers, probably a cooler here, filtration, dry sump tank, everything, grill, headlights, we're going to get to that. But next is going to be exhaust. There's obviously some relics of the past here, like this tube with this overlay that we'll want to clean up. But I didn't even want to put every bit of me wants to make this thing boxed and gusseted, draw a plate to the top of the frame and wrap over, draw it down, make it on tangent, re-weld this stuff, and then plate it all in and weld everything. Issues, and the same thing while we have this hole cut here. This hole is just enough. When we got that extra up travel, that's just, let me catch my breath. That's just enough to clear the 39. We're gonna go back and clear it for a 40. And then what we'll do is figure out the exhaust first, because I don't know if we're gonna run out of space. This thing's gonna want 2-inch primaries. And you can see it's already getting tighter, but where it really gets tight is through this section, because we cannot go inboard of the frame. We have a drive line. When this thing, goes into compression, that drive shaft, is living up here, and you're not able to run anything gnarly for your, your headers or anything. So this is gonna have to either draw through and go through this area, or it's gonna have to draw over and go through again, but we're in a threshold here where the tire is going to be, a culprit of being a constraint as well for real estate. So thinking it's going to have to go through here. There's some definite like excess material and stuff we can get to, and we can trim out, but it's going to be careful thought process, wide open, go through here. And then what's going to happen? Ooh. Oh my gosh. Oh, it sucks. I couldn't get out of my own bed for like 4 days in the hospital. This guy, we're going to cut, some kind of a hole in there and box it, or the exhaust will, it'll pull headers and go into a collector on the outside here. It'll go through the tube work here, and then it'll dive back into the frame. I'm not going to be that mobile to talk about all that, but it's going to exit out of the belly pan under here. So the next phase is going to be headers, exhaust, and then complete enclosure skid panels, all the way out to the rockers, closing everything up, and then all belly pan, and then it's going to get like a badass, like almost like a Vivian style exhaust exit, dual exits right before the rear end housing. So, probably shoot flames out the back of that thing and do what it's supposed to. That's a, close to 1,000 horsepower Whipple charged engine. So that's gonna, like I said, 2-inch primary, probably a 4-to-1 collector, 3.5 all the way through the side. We'll rip a muffler in here where we can. It's probably gonna be inboard of the frame rails, and then dive those things out and exit in a really cool pattern through the skid plate under the car before the rear end housing. So this is rough idea of Carrie. This is the longer section that has the bend in it. So this would be the opening for the rod end at the passenger side wheel. And then it's almost like a seed pod. Remember those seed pods you'd have like at school or something where they'd have like a little ripple, like long little thingies? Long little thingies. This is more of a refined edge. Like a boomerang or some kind of blade, and then there's mass where that one bend is, and then it tapers and then it grows out to the rod end again. Streamlined sunk in pinch bolts. So we're going to pivot on something like this. What I have to do is have Luke draw this and see it, like that's just a sketch. That doesn't actually have an underpinning like this other stuff I've drawn from his model already. But that's probably the greatest example of what we want. But it's really hard to find these shapes and know our constraints until I need one more step of him drawing that shape in SolidWorks, and then I can look at it and detail it out. The other thing to know is these pinches like we looked at here, right, like any of the pinch bolt stuff, that's the detail that we're gonna put on all of the normalized arms. So I think we'll do the large, tie rod that goes to the passenger beam, and then the other tie rod that goes to the driver. Will do similar shapes like this, except one's not going to have the kick in it, and then the other ones we'll just machine them around, put tapers in them, and then we'll put the pinch bolt on everything, where that's going to like run the same design language through all of these things. Cool part about that too is I have a problem with the tie rods, like not being able to tighten jam nuts properly. So having a locking pinch bolt on things, like a pinch bolt bung or anything is a premium option. So if that's incorporated into these, the other thing is it has to have that, and it probably has to have a wobble stopper, because when you start building a shape that's not a cylinder like that, it's gonna have mass and weight where it's gonna wanna twist or flop. So bottom line is with that, we'll set a wobble stopper probably in the swinger side, where it's not going to move as much, and that's just going to hold the rod end from not articulating and let that whole shape be floppy dick. Yep. So that's where we're at with this thing. I think next thing's other stuff you can look at. So these guys were planned for. Those fit and they nestle themselves in right here. They also clear the tire at bump and lock. The smaller guys are gonna live up here somewhere. But we kind of built this nook specifically for this guy. Most of these builds, I never do hose and fittings. It's too much to try to plan where the reservoirs are gonna go when you're building like a custom chassis. So what we do is we re-plumb these things in-house. I put the reservoirs where they're supposed to live, and you know, they fit best on the car, and the ergonomics are better. Oh, he's got a dirt bike in there, hell yeah. The ergonomics are good for putting nitrogen in them and servicing them. And then we literally just re-plumb, put 90s on them or whatever, you know, shorten the hoses, lengthen the hoses. So I never build the car around the shock and the reservoir hose length and reservoir, you know. Put the shocks where they go, put the reservoir where they go. Every single car we build gets valved. You know, Keith goes through them, so we don't need to worry about cracking the things open. You know, they get gone through no matter what. So that's done. I'm just short of breath. The phase after the headers and the exhaust, something that's exciting, which we ordered and we're probably gonna have to start mock-up on simultaneously, is the front grille and headlight assembly. We are going to be running a Bronco Raptor, new version Bronco Raptor headlight and grille that's gonna convert into the OBS. This had like a Raptor clip on it. I'm not gonna give you my input on Raptor conversions on Broncos or OBS trucks, but I would favor having an OBS truck with an OBS grille. I think the win here is, since you know we're already heavily styled in the back, I think there's a super good win here to put a new retro Bronco Raptor front grille and headlight on here and have a front clip that transitions that into the OBS. And I think that's a way more badass option than having a Raptor front clip on this thing. So things to look forward to. I appreciate you guys watching and thank you so much for the support.